Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 14, Section 1, the Pre-Columbian America, the Peoples of North America and Mesoamerica. And so as we go along, you've got some things to jot down. So we're going to talk a little bit about the North American cultures. And I realize this might be a little bit of review for some of you. So I just want to kind of briefly talk about some of the different regions of North America and some of the different peoples that were living there before we kind of dive into the Mesoamerica side of things. So just to kind of recap, maybe some things that you've learned in the past. When we talk about like the Arctic or subarctic peoples, this would include the peoples of the Inuit, the Aleut, the Ingalik. Uh, these are people that, because of the environmental conditions, they included permanent snow and ice issues that these people were dealing with. So they're going to rely on fishing and hunting of things like seals, mammals, anything like that for their food. As far as their homes, a lot of that's going to be built out of ice. And as far as the American West, this would include areas like present day Washington State, Oregon, or even northern parts of California. The people that are included here are the Haida, the Chinook, Columbian, the Miwok, the Chumash. Anyway, their geography included rivers, forests, and a long coastline. That would be basically, areas that would be kind of like between like the Cascade Mountains and the coastal mountains that you're going to find in parts of like Washington, Oregon, and California. Anyway, uh, fishing in rivers and the ocean was the main method of gaining food. They built their homes out of and houses um, out of the woods that came out of the forest. When we talk about like the Chinook people, a lot of them lived in longhouses, okay, with their families, and it was very communal. What's interesting is that's very similar to some of the different cultures that we're going to eventually hear about in parts of Africa. The desert Southwest, this would include peoples like the Hohokam, the Anasazi, the Apache, the Shoshone, the Tarahumara, the Waukee. One thing I want to mention about the Hohokam are kind of like in an area near what is present day Phoenix, Arizona, kind of in a valley surrounded by mountains. Um, they built a lot of structures out of adobe. When you talk about the Anasazi, these are people that were cliff dwellers. So if you've been or have ever heard about places like Mesa Verde out in southwest Colorado or the Tonto National Monument, which is in Arizona, these are basically villages that were built into the side of mountains. And part of that was for protection. It also allowed for reconnaissance because you could, kind of have the highland over your opponents. But nevertheless, these are people that were used to living in a dry, rocky environment. Uh, when you talk about like the Hohokam, they were using irrigation techniques to farm things like maize or corn, beans and squash, and they built their homes out of adobe or into the sides of a cliff. The plains, this would include people like the Blackfoot, the Sioux, the Omaha, the Comanche, the Crow. These are people that lived on a region that was treeless, grassy, basically plains with very fertile soil. They hunted buffalo or bison. They lived in teepees. A lot of times these were made out of buffalo skins. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about one particular group of basically North American native peoples. And I want to talk about the people of Cahokia. Cahokia is kind of a unique uh, situation here because it is like a civilization. It was at one time probably one of the biggest cities in the Americas. It's very similar when you talk about the style of civilization to those that you might have found in other ancient worlds. But the fascinating thing is, yes, in the United States, we did have pyramids. And we can thank the people of Cahokia for that. Anyway, these people built their civilization around the year 1050 to 1350 along the Mississippi River, just east of what is present day St. Louis, Missouri. Matter of fact, if you ever go to Cahokia, literally just a short distance away is like the Gateway Arch that you see. That's kind of takes a predominant place in the skyline of St. Louis. It's literally in the shadows of that. Anyway, at its height around 1100 AD, this was a city known as Cahokia, had a population between 14,000 to 18,000 people, which at that time exceeded the population of London. So this was not some little rinky-dink community. It was a city for the most part, and it was a major world city at the time. Anyway, the people of Cahokia were, for the most part, mound builders. And what we mean by that is they would take dirt and other substances and basically build their structures by hand. A lot of the people were basically filling baskets full of dirt and taking them to build a mound like you see there on the page before you. Anyway, at its height, they had made over 120 different earthen mounds, and the largest one that's still there today at Cahokia is known as Monk's Mound. When you look at the base of the structure, the base itself is roughly the same size as the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is in Egypt, which is kind of amazing that this is a structure that's roughly the same size as far as the base of it. But it is the tallest man-made earthen mound north of Mexico, probably one of the most well-preserved mounds in the United States as far as from the mound builders. And if you travel along the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys, there are different mound building civilizations that were existent here in the United States well before the United States became colonized by Europeans. Anyway, many of the mounds at Cahokia were probably used for some kind of religious ceremony, particularly Monk's Mound. There's talk that it was probably a place where they would go and do sacrifices and things of that nature. Below, over here, or I should say off to the side, is actually a solar calendar. The people of Cahokia were very good at keeping track of time and the seasons, and they had made this gigantic, basically you could call a calendar, with the different poles and where the sun would be and the shadows would be casted, would tell you what time of year it was. So this is very similar to maybe something on the lines of like Stonehenge that you might find in parts of modern day England. So anyway, the Maya, okay, they built their civilization around 900 BC. The Mayans began to settle what is known as the Yucatan Peninsula, which is kind of the far most eastern or southeastern part of Mexico today. Matter of fact, if you go to the Yucatan Peninsula, chances are you're there to go to the city of Cancun or the island of Cozumel, which is right about there. Um, enjoy some time in the sun. But the Mayan, this was their civilization at one point in time, and at the height of their civilization, more than 40 cities, with somewhere between 5,000 to roughly 10,000 people each. Chichen Itza, which is the site of their largest city and the site of this pyramid that you see below. Chichen Itza, the pyramid itself still stands to this day. And matter of fact, there was a time, if you were a tourist, you could actually go there and climb it. It's very, very steep, but a lot of people have done that over the years. Unlike other parts of the world where an antiquity like this would basically be hands off to tourists. So, needless to say, the Mayan city states and kingdoms were all linked by culture, political ties, warfare, and most importantly, trade. The Mayans had constructed large pyramids. These are symbolically sacred mountains where thousands of people gathered for ceremonies and festivals. The Mayans were one of the first American peoples to develop a writing system. They had kind of their form of hieroglyphics, which, if you look at the image there on the right hand side of the screen, that's kind of what that is. Anyway, this writing system was used to record the royal genealogy, meaning keeping track of the royal family members, their mythology, their history, their ritual practices, trade. All of this was very sophisticated as far as keeping track of their chronology. Wait, number 10, to chart the movement of the sun, moons, planets, the Mayans became excellent mathematicians and astronomers. Scholars believe that the decline of the Mayan civilization might be due to a very long drought that increased warfare and competition for land and the demands of the powerful kings, causing people to rebel or even to leave. All right, we're going to talk about Toltec. The Toltec people defeated the Teotihuacanos and established their civilization in what is now present-day central Mexico. Their civilization flourished between 900 and 1150 AD, and kind of was mysteriously destroyed. One of the things that is kind of indicative of the Toltec are these carved statues that you see to the right of the screen here, which are kind of cool. Anyway, the Toltecs were legendary sculptors, and they had artists who left many impressive monuments and stone carvings behind. They were ferocious warriors, and they were dedicated to the conquest and the spread of a cult. Their cult was called the Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl. Anyway, this is their greatest of their gods. It's known as the plumed serpent. Uh, this god, Quetzalcoatl, was later adopted by the Aztecs. And it's kind of a dragon like figure, if you kind of look at that, kind of a serpent, which is kind of intimidating. And I'm sure the Aztec probably thought that was looking pretty cool themselves. Anyway, Aztecs, around 1325 AD, they developed on the site of what is now Mexico City, and they also founded what is known as Tenochtitlan, which is kind of their capital and of their empire, and it was on an island. If you take a look at the map, that's off onto the left-hand side of your screen, in the middle of what is known as Lake Texcoco. And what's interesting is, years later when the Spaniards came to Mexico and eventually defeated the Aztecs, this was going to be the site of a pretty big battle. When you talk about the causeways, those are those little bridges that you see from kind of the mainland into the island. At some point in time, after the Spaniards conquered this area, they actually like had this lake filled in, which is kind of impressive to think that they could do that by hand. But nevertheless, in the center of uh, Tenochtitlan was a walled compound that served as a political and religious center with a huge pyramid. And that pyramid still stands today. Matter of fact, it's pictured right there. It has many temples surrounding it. Yes, you can climb it. As you can see, there's some people standing way up at the top of that. It's quite the climb if you do that. Anyway, the city of Tenochtitlan was centered around a pyramid that was dedicated to this Aztec god known as Huitzilopochtli. Okay, uh, the temple was topped with shrines to the gods and an altar for performing religious sacrifices, which included the Aztec practice of human sacrifice, because they believed in a battle between good and evil and an inevitable end to every world. And they performed human sacrifices to kind of postpone the end. So you can take a look there at the images that were drawn by witnesses years past to some of these sacrifices, which obviously were incredibly gory. As you can see there, it looks like one of the men, their heart was taken out. Needless to say, when the Aztecs were uh, eventually invaded by the Spaniards were just horrified by what they saw. And certainly one of the things that they wanted to do was to cleanse, uh, these temples from all this bloodletting and such. So, needless to say. Aztec civilization was organized in a hierarchy, with each level of authority being more powerful than the one below it. So if you take a look here, the emperor obviously is at the top, and you have your nobility and your priests and your merchants, all the way down to those people who were enslaved. In Aztec society, men were trained from childhood to be warriors, and women were trained to take care of the household. Okay, not to say that there was some sexism going on here, but you might be thinking it was true. Anyway, Aztec women, unlike other women of this era of time, could own and inherit property and enter into contracts, which, if you look at the Romans or even the ancient Greeks, some of their women didn't have those rights. So Aztec women maybe were a little ahead of the times. Anyway, the advanced Aztec civilization also had a writing system, kind of their form of hieroglyphics. They also kept written records. They developed an accurate calendar and were really masters of not only metal but stone as well. Thank you very much.